Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Melissa Rich, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the Taking Care of Your Temple podcast. I have an awesome guest with me today, Jeremy Daniel from my church. And what's your title, Jeremy? Tell me one more time, please.
I'm the groups pastor.
Groups pastor, that's it. And we're going to be talking about groups, about being connected to groups. So I thought that was appropriate to have Jeremy on here. So let me give you guys a little recap that I always give at the start of a hypnosis session, at the start of a podcast episode. That is that the reason I started this podcast was to try to help women, although we do have some male listeners too, and that's fine, but to help women connect with God regularly, and to do that by using his grace, power, strength, might, wisdom, all the things to improve their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. There's a lot of different ways that we can do that. I recommend the following 4 principles. One is to keep our focus on God. One of those things that sounds so basic, so easy. Well, of course we want to do that, but it can be difficult to do because we're always distracted. Next is to acknowledge that we are not enough on our own. We just have all these things come up that we're not smart enough. Well, I will say I'm not smart enough to handle by myself, and I want God's help. The good news is he is always willing to give it to us if we ask him for it. The third principle to remember, it is about progress, not about perfection. I just had a client in earlier today who says she is always beating herself up for not doing things perfectly. I mean, who can do things perfectly? So we don't want to do that. And the next thing is to work on consciously changing our thoughts. If we are giving ourselves regularly a lot of negative messages, it's going to affect how we think, feel, and act. So that's not a good thing. The verse for this podcast is 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? And we are all part of God's temple, not just one of us by ourselves, but we are part of the body of Christ. And so we are part of his temple. And I think that's a good thing. Okay. So Jeremy is the groups pastor at Highland Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. He moved with his family to Waco from the Metroplex, and that was Dallas-Fort Worth, right? The Metroplex.
Yes.
Yes. 2015. So I've heard people call Houston Metroplex. So
yeah,
we have several.
Listen to those people.
Yeah. He has been married to his beautiful wife, Stacy, for 23 years. They have 3 different but very loved children, ages 17, 15, and 13. You have a house full of teenagers.
There are a lot of them. They're eating me out of house and home for sure.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. Jeremy is passionate about helping people learn scriptures and helping people fall more in love with Christ through the church. Okay, so let's start off. Tell us a little bit, please, about your family growing up, your education, your job experience, your family now with your 3 teens.
Yeah. So I grew up in West Texas, not West Texas, but the region West Texas in Abilene. It was a fairly tumultuous home. But I would say, like, one of the things that they taught me was that church is a place where you are. And so we were there every time the doors were open. And so we were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, all of the youth things. But the way that our lives kind of operated and functioned outside of the church were a little bit different than they were inside of the church. And I think as a result of seeing some of those things, I was a little bit jaded, maybe even a little bit skeptical of the church. And so I graduated from high school, went to college in West Texas at Hardin-Simmons University. And my wife and I met the summer after I graduated high school. And we got married 4.5 years later in 2000. And I will say the good thing about both of us is that we kind of both grew up in the church. So we both had this sense of, at the very least, even if we weren't kind of all in on church life, we went to church because that was the thing that we did. But I think in 2004, I was teaching at the time. We moved up to Dallas and we were looking for a church. And so we joined, and for whatever reason, the Lord just really kind of captivated us there. And it was there that I really learned to love the church. And part of that is because it was really the first time that we began to understand the importance of community in the life of church, the importance of confession and accountability, and the ability that to walk in freedom that you get as a result of those things. And so it really was there that I fell in love with the church. And then I was teaching, had just graduated with my master's degree in education. So I was teaching, doing a little administration. And then the Lord decided to call me out of that and into ministry. So I started out in student ministry, did student ministry for about a year, and then went into recovery and counseling ministry and did that for the next 7. And then we moved here in 2015 for me to take the group's position here at Highland. Kids love them to death. They are very different, wired differently. So I have 2 boys and a girl. Oldest is a junior. We're getting ready for all the college things. Middle is a freshman and falling more and more in love with soccer every day. Our third, she is awesome. She's beautiful. We adopted her, got her when she was 8 months old, and adopted her right before she turned 3. And so our house is, it's full of life and frustration sometimes too, but mostly life.
Yeah, good deal. So you said that you were in recovery ministry. Was that recovery from like addictions? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I oversaw basically a ministry that really kind of dealt with people's hurts, habits, and hangups. I think it would be the Celebrate Recovery language. Some people are familiar with Celebrate Recovery, but and so we just really viewed it as a discipleship ministry. And if the Lord can engage and address people who are hurting in the midst of their hurt, we wanted to provide a space for that. And so we had people who were struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, struggling with past trauma, struggling with all manner of sin and suffering. And so it was, I think the Lord taught me a lot about me for sure, but then also about ministering to his people, and sometimes those people that the church might view as really difficult to minister to.
And I think that is such an important ministry, because I think way too many people are dealing with those things, and they feel that they are so broken that they shouldn't be in church, which is exactly where they need to be.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was back still in Oklahoma, my church there, a large Baptist church, they started, I don't think it was called Celebrate Recovery back then, but something similar. But they started it because our pastor's, I think, middle son, they found out, was addicted to drugs. And this was, none of us were, we had no concept of what that was like, but that just led them into this ministry that has touched so many lives. It's been amazing. I just think if we can't bring brokenness to the church, where can we?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've been really encouraged about our church specifically is just the willingness to be vulnerable and to be open about the things that are actually going on in our hearts and lives. When I first started, I don't know that it was necessarily that way, but we've grown in that. I've been here 8 years now, and I've kind of seen us grow in that. I think there's a lot of different reasons for it, but that's been one of the areas of growth in our church that I've been really thankful for, is just people's willingness to say, you know what, I don't have it all together. I'm not completely buttoned up, and I need help with this. And I think the beauty is when you have a group of people who can continually point you back to the gospel, then that's where we find hope and healing, right? Not in our own strength, but in the power of the gospel. So I love it. I enjoy it.
Well, I think that's so appropriate, because this episode is about connecting with the Christian community. And I think the more broken you are, the more you need that connection, because otherwise I think Satan just tells you you're not worthy. You don't deserve it. You should be here. And so you just try to go out and do it all by yourself. And boy, that's a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think so too. I think the 2 biggest tools of our enemy are accusation and isolation. That you are too far gone, that you are completely unlovable. There's no way that God could ever forgive you for this. And then isolation, if anybody ever knew, They
Yes,
would reject
yes,
you. If anybody ever knew, they would. If she finds out, she's going to divorce you. If they find out,
yeah,
they're gonna hate you. They're all going to laugh at you. Your reputation is going to be destroyed.
right,
And so, um, and I think the beauty of having a community around you is that they're able to speak the truth of the gospel. That God knows you, He loves you, He sees every single bit of it, and in spite of all of it, He loves you, and we love you. And so,
yes,
so incredibly helpful. I think
yeah,
to have a community of believers around you, to see things one that you can't see, and to believe things on your behalf, and to point you towards the gospel at all times.
yeah. I was a family therapist for 28 years, and I found out very quickly that group therapy was really much more powerful than individual therapy, because when people heard it from other people like them, whatever the group was about, then they
Yeah,
believed a lot more than when they heard it from a therapist, because
yeah,
these people had been there or were there with them. And I just think that those groups are so powerful. It's such a great way to connect and to change and to get encouragement and acceptance.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it's cool. Okay. So the reason I wanted to do this episode is because I just seem to come across so many people who say that they're Christians, but they're not going to church anywhere, and they're not connected to any type of Christian group. I mean, is this something that you have become aware of at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we deal with, regularly. It's I kind of liken it to the I'm spiritual but not religious crowd, right? I think I love Jesus. I have a relationship with Him, but I don't really feel like I need the church. And so, one of the things that I always tell people is, yeah, I mean, I think you can be a believer in Jesus, you can be faithful, you can do all those things and not go to church. But what I will say is where you will absolutely be stunted is in your growth and maturity, right? Because part of the beauty of community is that you are around people who are sinful, and you're around people who are messy, and you're going to be challenged, and sometimes you're around people who know the word better than you do, and so you're going to be challenged in those ways. One of the things that we say in our new member classes all the time is that we don't think we don't think that you can grow into everything that God has for you outside of the context of a local congregation. And I think even deeper than that, outside of the context of a local congregation, in Christian community with a group of people who know you, who know the places where you wrestle and struggle, who know you honestly. So I think knowing and being known are some of the building blocks of Christian maturity. And just outside of the church, I don't know that you can get that fully.
Yeah, and I really have just become so convicted. I don't think that God calls us to be Lone Ranger Christians.
For sure. I think there's so much of the scriptures that don't make sense at all if you don't need to be a part of, like, submitting to elders, right? Is that all elders everywhere? Is that just people who are older? It would seem that when he's talking about that he's talking about it in the context of a local church. And so there's just so many things like that where it's like, this doesn't make sense if we're not part of a body, if we're not part of a congregation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you need the church. I may be biased also. I'll acknowledge that.
Sure.
I could be biased, but I don't think I am. And I think that's biblical. I mean, honestly, to be a part of a local body.
Yeah. I looked up some stats before we did this, and what I found is that 67% of U.S. adults say they attended religious services regularly while they were growing up. However, only 31% are attending regularly today. That's about half. Why do you think that's happening? What's going on there?
Honestly, I think there's lots of studies that are coming out now about the nuns, right? Like not the nuns, like the Catholic nuns, but the people who are now beginning to identify more with no faith or no religious affiliation or no denominational affiliation. I think part of that is cultural. Like There was a point in our history, especially right here at the buckle of the Bible Belt in Waco, Texas, where to be a part of a church, to have the right language and vernacular, there was a social advantage that came
Right.
along with that.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a stigma if you weren't. And now the opposite of that is kind of true. The social advantage is kind of disappearing, and the stigma really becomes more of, oh, you believe this or you believe that about particular things, and that becomes the stigma. And so I think what you see is people who were nominal to begin with, no longer seeing the need to be part of a congregation. And then on the other side of that, I think as you kind of see churches grow and the desire to entertain people grow, people are smart and they have a good understanding when they go into a place, whether there's a genuine desire to see them grow and learn and thrive. And they understand when they're just being entertained. And if church is just about my entertainment or just about getting me to help you keep the lights on, then there's not really anything that's going to keep me grounded in the body. One of the things that we ask at our new member class all the time, every time we do it, is what brought you here and what's keeping you here. And the two things that we get over and over every single new member class is that we are rooted in the scriptures, that we preach the word, that we do it honestly, that we do it unapologetically, and that we do it basically verse by verse. And so we don't shy away from difficult passages. But then the second thing is it's the thing that keeps them is generally the community of faith that they find here, the community that they find within the local context. So I think when you don't have those things, you lose the social advantage to being part of a particular community. Then it just no longer really becomes useful or a draw to them.
You know, I think having grown up in the church, my dad was a pastor, my parents were missionaries. I think a lot of people end up leaving church because they have unrealistic expectations. They get their feelings hurt. They feel included. You know, I even did this with my husband when he was alive at one point. We were both in choir, and he got to the point where he didn't want to go anymore. And I'm like, why aren't you going to choir? And he said, well, he was out for some reason, like 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And he goes, and nobody called me. And I looked at him and I said, okay, how often do you call people when they are out for several weeks? Well, that's different. Like, yeah, it always is. Yeah. But I think that people get these unrealistic expectations and get their feelings hurt. And so they just leave. But the problem is there is no perfect church that they're going to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I tell people, if you find the perfect church, you'll ruin it. And I just think some of the expectations that people have when they come into church, they're not realistic. They actually are fairly realistic according to the scriptures, the way we're supposed to live and walk among one another. I think what really should set the church apart isn't that it's perfect relationships and perfect interactions, because you don't get that anywhere in society, right? No. There are no perfect relationships, perfect interactions. What's supposed to make it different is the ways that we respond. And when I fail you, the way that I respond is really to come and ask you, like, hey, I failed. Like I have offended you. I've sinned against you. Can you forgive me? And in the same way, when you fail, you come to me and you're able to say those things. And it's the gospel really that draws us together. We have an all forgiving, all kind, all loving God who has forgiven us much. So we're able to forgive those slights and offenses as they come. And, you know, I think it's I like to kind of equate it to one of the things that you'll hear a lot is like, I really like Jesus, but I don't like the church. Yeah. And so I tell people all the time, that's like you saying to me, that Jeremy, I really like you, but I can't really stand Stacy. Like, I want to be around her. I don't really want anything to do with her. But you and me, we'll have a relationship. And but I say is, well, you and I are not going to be okay in that moment, because I am so closely tied and identified to my pride. There's no way to really know and understand me outside of my wife and everything that she's in my heart. I think it's the same way with Jesus in the church. Can you have a relationship? Sure. But there's no way that I understand and love and care for him the way he's called me to outside of that context of the people that he's been building for himself, which is what God's been doing throughout all history, creating a people for himself. And so while your faith is intensely personal, it was never meant to be private, never meant to be lived out alone. I think you said that earlier. We were never meant to do these things alone. And so we've always been called to a people. He's always been building a church. And so, in fact, that's what you are when you become a believer in Christ. Like, you become a part of that universal union with Christ, that universal church that works itself out in that smaller context of where you live and where you eat and where you work, the people that are around you there. So, yeah, I mean, I know there's people who have been wounded by the church, legitimately wounded by the church, but I think that's where the church has to do a good job of really living out what it looks like to be a flawed human being, sinful human being among other flawed and sinful human beings. And so when we fail, we want to confess that. We want to ask for forgiveness. We want to figure out how to make that right. And then we want to move forward so that the world can see that we're different in the way that we interact. So Jesus says, they'll know my disciples by two things. Number one, their fruit, and number two, their love for one another. So it's not, you offended me, so now I'm just going to bail, but you offended me, and because I love you, I'm going to engage you. I'm going to expect that you're going to engage me. We're going to work through it according to the scriptures, because it's what we've been called to do.
Yeah, you and I grew up in the church and kind of are comfortable with that. It's an organization, I guess, that we are familiar with and comfortable with. A lot of people nowadays did not grow up in the church. So what are some things that they want to get into church? What do they even look for? Because they don't know what are good things that they should look for in a church?
Yeah, I think number one, it's knowing your beliefs and your expectations, right? I tell people tend to go online. They start thinking about, hey, I want to find a church that has that has good music, that has good program, that has an engaging, entertaining speaker, and so really begin to think about church as a place where they can receive particular things or participate in particular programs. And I don't think finding a church is less than that, but I think there is a lot more to it, right? And so there can be lots of entertaining speakers, lots of really great worship, but if I disagree wholeheartedly with the statement of faith of the church, then it's probably a bad idea for me to go there, because I'm going to find myself frustrated a lot of times. And I think sometimes people do that. They get into a place because they like the speaker, or they like the music, or they like the program, and they didn't really understand the beliefs of that place. So when those beliefs started bumping up against their own beliefs, they were really frustrated. And their expectation was, hey, if I say something or I do something, then they'll probably change their beliefs. And the reality is, that's probably not going to happen. And so I think knowing what you're getting into on the front end, that's why we have a new member class, right? We walk through the beliefs of the church, because we want you to know up front, hey, here are the things that we believe. Here are the things that you should expect from us. Here are the things that we expect from you, so that there's no surprises 3 years in and they go, oh, wait, we believe this? We want you to know those things. I think number two, one of the difficult things I think at times about joining the congregation is feeling that it's difficult to get connected. And so I would say looking at opportunities to be able to get plugged into community, whether that's Sunday school or home groups or things like that. You want places where you can plug in with some other believers. And I think third, on the other side of that, is opportunity to serve. And so if we think about church as just for and about us, Then I'm going to go into that place, and I'm going to be thinking, how can this church serve me? When in reality, I think we want to kind of flip that paradigm on its head and go, I want to get into a place where I can use these gifts that God has given me to build up and edify the bride. And so, number one, when we're looking for a church, I think know what you believe and know what that church believes, so that you're going to be on the same page. You aren't any surprise when you get in. Number two, find a place that is going to be able to help you get connected into the community. And then three, find a place that's going to allow you to exercise the gifts that God has given you for the common good, for the building up and the edifying of Christ's bride.
I think Highland is a big church, and I like big churches, so that works out well for me. However, it's very easy, if you wanted to come to church, sit in the back, do the worship, slip out, not go to any of the groups, and just go home. And so when it's over, and so you really don't connect with anybody. But especially in a big church, there are lots of opportunities, as you said, to serve. And if you are serving, then you are connecting. So I know in a church like ours, you're going to know more than I do, so feel free to add. I see people serving as greeters on Sunday morning. They hold the door open when I come in. There's these two gentlemen in the door that I always come in. They always smile and welcome me. I see people driving the little golf carts in the parking lot. So if people park way out and they have like a bunch of little kids, they can, drive them to the door. What are some other things that people do around the church as volunteers that they can plug into? I know there's a bunch more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, depending on the church, there are any number of things. I would say that a majority of ministry that happens at Highland happens because we have faithful members who serve. And so all of our Sunday school classes are led by volunteers, and led by staff. All of our home groups, those are led by people who are volunteering. A single woman is paid. We have people who open doors and smile. We have people who stand behind desks to answer questions about charity. We have people who make coffee every Sunday morning. We have people who serve in our nursery and our kids ministry and our student ministry. And so I would say that the difference in Highland and be a smaller church really only scale. The number of people that it actually takes to carry things off on a Sunday morning. The reality is that we have just under 4,000 members at Highland. We have 7 elders. We have 17 ministry staff, right? So that's basically 24 people whose job it is to care for and oversee the church. And if you want to get really even into a more scriptural definition, there's 7 there that God has entrusted these 3,995 people. So there is no way for us to know them and love them and serve them outside of faithful men and women saying, hey, we're going to partner with you to care for. So, and that's my whole job, right? My whole job is taking this big group of 3,995 people and breaking it down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller groups. And so, our church does not function outside of faithful men and women. But the reality is, I don't think there's any church that should function or does function well outside of faithful men and women who are willing to step in and serve and to lead.
And, I think a lot of people, especially if they didn't grow up in the church, they're intimidated about volunteering or whatever. But you can start out really small. I mean, the people in the parking lot who are holding up the stop sign or waving cars. Or I remember when I was in my church in Oklahoma, it was about a medium-sized church. And there was a couple who came up every Sunday faithfully. They were in their 70s, and they would sit in the church office on Saturday and fold bulletins. Get the bulletins. Now I think they have folders now. They don't have to do that. But that was before they had them. And that was what they did. So it can be something really small to help you plug in and get going.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, 2 things. Number one, they either feel intimidated about I don't know that I'm the person who can lead, or I've also found that they feel like sometimes if they're not on stage or they're not doing a particular thing where lots of people see that that it's not really meaningful what they do. But I try and tell people a lot that, hey, what you do matters, right? Like it matters. So that parking lot ministry, I think, is a great example of that. I call it the street to the seat ministry. Those people opening the door, your face is the first face someone sees when they walk into our building. And really, you set the tone for the morning. So if you have a bad interaction because you're like, come in, I guess, that's going to set the tone for that person walking into the congregation. But when you smile and when you greet and when you ask them questions, then they're like, oh man, this is a place where people are actually happy that I'm here. And that's important, right? So not everybody in the body is a hand, and not everybody in the body is an eye, not everybody is a foot. We have different giftings, and there's things that people are really, really great at that I'm just not. And there's people there's things that I'm really good at that others are not. And the guy uses all of those things to make us a whole body that points to Jesus. So it's not about like, oh, look at the pastor on the stage and he gave a great sermon. I wish I could do something like that. It is really, man, that's how God has gifted and inspired me to build up this bride in this place, and I'm gonna serve with all I have. And so that's smiling at someone when they walk in the door. I'm gonna give them the biggest smile that I can muster. I ask them the best questions I can answer. I'm gonna have a good engagement there, not because that's what the church expects me to do or the way they train me to do it, but because I'm doing that for the glory of God. I want to see Christ exalted in my opening of the door. I'm going to make this coffee the best that I can because I want to see Christ exalted in me making this coffee. But it's very rare that we think about Christ being exalted in us making a pot of coffee. But the reality is that's exactly what we're doing. According to the gifts that God has given, we're operating in those things to magnify Christ and see the body built up.
And I think, again, Highland is a very big church, but there are churches of all sizes. I really believe in every church there is a place for you to plug in. You just have to look for it. And you're right, it's not always going to be on center stage, but you may not be out in the corner either. And some people don't want to be on center stage.
Sure.
They want to be doing their thing kind of behind the scenes, but there are always things that need to be done. And as you said, the staff, the elders, they cannot do it all by themselves. There's no way. The church would just collapse.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing too, is, as we begin to understand what the church is. So if the church is a building that we go to program on Sunday morning, then I think that we absolutely should be frustrated. The staff aren't doing everything, right? Like that's what we're paying them to do. That's why we come to this building. They can encourage us and we can even do whatever. But if the church is a family that we belong to, that means that if I read my role correctly, then it is to equip you, saint, for the work of ministry, so that when you go, we gather in to be encouraged by the word, to be challenged, to be equipped to then go out into the world and spread the gospel and make disciples. But we have a tendency to think of the church in the opposite fashion, that this is where I go, or this is where we send people to hear the gospel, and which is true. Like we should be preaching the gospel in churches, but we have a tendency to take our responsibility as believers in general to place it on the church organization and say, oh no, you need to be making converts. You need to be doing these particular things, when actually what the scripture says, no, we're the role of the church and the role of the leaders in the church is to train and equip the body so that they can go out into the places where God has sovereignly placed them to make an impact there for the gospel. Because there's people that you're going to meet every day that I'm never going to be in contact with.
Right.
People that are there's access that people have to the spaces and organizations that they're never going to give me just because I'm a pastor on my name tag. And so I think the more that we begin to understand the role of the minister and the role of the believer, which I also carry. So I may be a minister, but I'm also a believer. And so in the spaces and the places that I am, I need to be doing these things as well. But we don't view the church as a building that we go to. We view it as a family that we belong to.
I like that. And, again, big churches, medium-sized churches, I think even small churches, you really need to be able to be part of a smaller group within that church, because you are not going to be able, as you said, to know every person in the church. John, our pastor, cannot interact with everybody. He just can't. I mean, there's too many of us and one of him. So when you break it down, which a lot of churches are doing nowadays, and you plug into a smaller group, that's where you get a lot of times that fellowship and that connection and that encouragement. So tell us about a little bit about the connection groups at Highland.
So RCGs are made up of groups of about 10 or 12 people. Our focus in those groups is confession and accountability, just being known. And man, I'm super encouraged by just the way that they love one another, they care for one another. So I told you earlier yesterday, I was on the way to Houston to be with a family who's walking through a really difficult season and circumstance right now. And I think the most encouraging part of that whole day for me was when I got there and there were people from their CG who had been at the hospital with them all night, who had brought them food, who were watching their kids. Somebody left to buy one of them shoes because they had forgotten their shoes. So it was things like that, getting to watch the body be the body. And they didn't need me. I mean, I was able to do some things that were encouraging and all of that, but at the end of the day, they didn't need me there. What they needed was their body, and that's what they did. And so we encourage and challenge and really empower our groups to be that for their people. And again, because I'm not going to know every single need and every single person in our church. But the reality that there is somebody or a group of people who do know those things, and so that they're able to, hey, Jeremy, here's a thing that's going on in our group. Can you come to the hospital? Absolutely, I can come to the hospital, but thank you for being there before me.
Yeah.
Because what they need more than me coming in and, reading a Bible verse to them and maybe trying to give them some encouragement is the people who know them and love them and who have warred with them and prayed for them. Being there with them is such a huge encouragement to them. In fact, that's why they say they were at the church. They were walking through a difficult time, and people that they barely knew when they first started just surrounded them in love. And so they're like, and so we stayed, and here we are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think those connection groups or CGs, they really do become like family. I mean, that's and they're not perfect. And you're going to get annoyed at people in it and angry at times.
For sure.
It's going to happen. You do that with your family. But I think that if you just go to this big church and you don't become part of some smaller groups, you're going to feel adrift. You're just, even like I said, a medium-sized church or a small church, because you don't have anybody who really knows you and is going to encourage you and support you, and that you can do the same to them. I think that's so really important.
Yeah. And I think, the way we say it in our new member classes, the church can only come around you to meet the needs that we know about.
Exactly.
Right? And so if you are coming in on a Sunday morning and then leaving and then frustrated because the church didn't help you in this moment, well, of course they didn't. They didn't know about it. You didn't give them the opportunity. Now, I will say that there's times, again, because no one's perfect, no church is perfect, that you make that need known, and again, it's not that need is not met or dealt with or acknowledged in a way that that you feel like was sufficient. And the reality is sometimes it was not dealt with in a way that was sufficient. But the reality is most of the time, like those needs aren't met because we just don't make them known. And so I think being able to be in a place where you feel safe enough and comfortable enough to say, hey, here's a place where I have a need. Is there anything, or can you pray with me, or can you help in this? And those things happen far better in relationship. And so we always encourage people, like, the best way to be cared for in our church is to be a part of community. And even with counseling, like, I meet with people, and they're like, hey, I need counseling for this. And the first question that I generally ask them is, hey, are you in a CG? And they answer no. I'm like, maybe what you need more than you need to sit down and meet with one-on-one is you need a group of people around you that you can share with, because at the end of the day, some of the things you're sharing with me, what I'm going to tell you at the end of this meeting anyway, is you need to find one or two or three other people that you trust and share it with them. Because the counseling scenario, you're not you're gonna talk to me at the time that we kind of arrange to sit down and meet. In a group situation, I call you on Saturday and say, hey, here's the thing that's going on. I don't get that in a counseling relationship, right? Well, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it at our meeting on Wednesday. But in a connection group, I can call anybody in that group at any point and say, hey, here's the thing. Can you help me? Can you walk with me? Can you pray with me? Can you meet with me? And what they're going to find is someone that's going to be able to say yes. So most people are longing for that kind of connection. Most people really need that kind of connection. So I'd say, even as I'm counseling people, what I'm encouraging them is, hey, you need to be in a group. You cannot do this alone. I can't be the only person that knows about this or that's walking with you through this. Now, there's definitely some things where I'm like, okay, that's not always 100% the case, but it's very rare that I say, yeah, I'm the only person who should know about this. Even in difficult trauma and things, does anybody else know this? You need to find one other person that you trust and share with them what you just shared with them. Yeah. And if it's just one, it needs to be someone else. So community aspect, I think, is just really, really important. Can't be overstated. It's so important that we walk in community with others.
And I think you're not going to be as willing to share the big things until you've laid that foundation and you've connected with people. So it is important to go to these, be a part of these things on a regular basis, not just wait until catastrophe happens. And you need to have established those connections. I think it's just really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to close this part with Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Let us be concerned for one another, to help one another, to show love and to do good. Let us not give up the habit of meeting together as some are doing. Instead, let us encourage one another all the more, since you see that the day of the Lord is coming nearer. And I think that just says it beautifully. We need to be consistent. Okay. I think that's really all I have. Is there any bit of wisdom you want to close with before we finish up?
Yeah, I would say, again, I think community is always going to be messy, because it is full of messy people.
Yes.
But it is so incredibly important that we are known and that we know others, so that we can grow into everything that Christ has for us. And so I would just encourage you, if you're not part of a local body, not part of a local congregation, you can find one. If you have questions about how to do that, you can reach out to me, reach out to Melissa. I'm not going to try and sell my church to you, but I would love to help you get connected in any place near you. I think there's a lot of godly churches in Waco that would love to partner with people in helping them get connected into some Christian community.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Jeremy, for guesting. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys will be back next week. I'm actually getting ready to do a two-parter on spiritual gifts. Kind of goes along with some of what we were talking about. So I hope that you guys will come back. Everyone have a good day. And thank you so much. I'll see you Sunday, Jeremy.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Bye.